What's up, my friends? Take a deep breath, because something feels different in Philly. The entire city has spent the week buzzing like a spark racing through every corner, ready to explode the moment these two teams step onto the field. Every detail has been broken down, every matchup studied, and now it's clear, this isn't just another primetime game. It's a turning point. The opponent arrives overflowing with confidence, with an offense that doesn't forgive and turns any small gain into a real threat. And on the other side, our defense, that wall that lives on the edge but never breaks, faces a test that reveals who's truly ready for December. So, Green Nation, before this battle begins, smash that like if you're confident the Eagle is taking down the Lion tonight. And if possible, drop this in the comments. Go Eagles! Even with Detroit's success, their defense hasn't been untouchable, and the numbers show it. They sit 13th in points allowed, a ranking that can be misleading when you consider how fast and explosive their offense operates. That's a double-edged sword. Score often and quickly, and your defense ends up back on the field defending possessions that become opportunities for opponents. This is where Philadelphia must strike. The Lions can put up 31 a night, but they can also give up enough to make this a shootout if the Eagles' offense shows up the way it should. And that's been one of the most frustrating elements of this Eagles season. The red zone dominance has been elite, number one in the league at more than 80% touchdowns, but the rest of the offense has been inconsistent, ranking 23rd in yards per game and struggling badly on third downs. That inconsistency is why this matchup becomes so much more than numbers on a sheet. Against Green Bay, the Eagles won, barely, while putting up only 10 points. Sure, the weather was brutal, and sure, that kind of wind can wreck any passing attack, but none of that applies this Sunday night. This time the conditions are normal, the expectations are higher, and everyone knows 10 points won't cut it against a Detroit team that scores as easily as they breathe. If the Eagles want to prove they belong at the top of the NFC, this is the moment to show it. But the most compelling storyline going into this game has nothing to do with the offense. It's the pass rush, finally coming alive at the exact moment this team needed it most. The last two games have been different. They've been violent. They've been urgent. They've been the kind of performances that remind you what postseason level defense actually looks like. And it all clicked the moment Jalen Phillips stepped into an Eagles uniform and immediately played like he'd been part of this defense for years. Because in a sense, he has. Vic Fangio built a relationship with him back in Miami, and that scheme familiarity showed instantly. Phillips didn't need time to learn anything. He just needed snaps. And once he got them, he dominated. Against Green Bay, he delivered 8 pressures, 7 hurries, multiple hits on the quarterback, a forced fumble, a recovery, and played a major role in blowing up a critical 4th and 1. That is not normal for a player in his first game with a new team. That is someone who knows exactly what to do and is comfortable executing it at full speed. When you combine that with the surges from Jay Hunt, the interior disruption from Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis, and the return of Nolan Smith who snagged a sack of his own, suddenly this defensive front feels like it has teeth again. And facing Jared Goff, a purely stationary quarterback who will not escape the pocket, this matchup becomes the single biggest advantage the Eagles have. The contrast couldn't be clearer. Detroit can block. Their offensive line is one of the most technically sound units in the league with Taylor Decker, Penn Sewell, and a stable interior. But Goff is not Jordan Love. If this Eagles front generates pressure even close to what they did the last 2 weeks, the Lions' timing, rhythm, and spacing get disrupted instantly. And when Goff is forced off his spot, turnovers appear. History says that. Tape confirms it. Even this season, the moments he struggled have been the moments defenses collapsed the pocket on him. Still, this isn't just about the front seven. It's about how the secondary handles one of the NFL's most complete wide receivers, Amon-Ra St. Brown. The Lions will move him everywhere, slot, boundary, backfield, and that means Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean will have their hands full all night. St. Brown has already posted more than 60 catches and nearly 700 yards heading into Week 11. He is the engine of their passing game. He's the one player Detroit will lean on when they need to calm the crowd, quiet momentum, or steal a touchdown before halftime. And the Eagles' young defensive backs must match that versatility snap after snap. Then there's the run game. Detroit doesn't bring one style, they bring two. Jahmyr Gibbs, the Lightning, and David Montgomery, the Hammer. 13 rushing touchdowns between them, nearly 1,200 yards combined, and 2 entirely different problems to solve. Gibbs can erase angles. Montgomery can erase linebackers. The Eagles' run defense has been solid, but not dominant, and this will be their biggest test to date. All of these layers lead to one truth. This game will not be won with one big play or one single adjustment. It will be won possession by possession, mistake by mistake, response by response. Philadelphia understands that. They know Detroit is coming in with rest advantage. They know the league is watching. They know the NFC playoff race is tightening. And with everything surrounding this matchup, the noise, the criticism, the pressure, this is the moment the Eagles want. The moment they can remind everyone exactly who they believe they are. Before we continue into the next phase of this breakdown, I want to know what you think. With everything we've laid out so far, do you believe this Eagles defense can slow down Detroit enough to set the tone on Sunday night? And if the defense can create that early tone, everything shifts to the one unit that cannot afford another uneven performance, the offense. What happened in Green Bay simply can't repeat itself. 10 points won't survive 5 minutes against a team averaging more than 30 per game, and the truth is, even the Eagles players know it. The conditions at Lambeau provided a convenient explanation, but explanations don't win primetime matchups that could determine playoff seeding. This is a week where Kevin Bulow must call the kind of game that matches the mentality of the opponent. Dan Campbell isn't dialing up conservative football. He isn't punting in plus territory. He isn't afraid to fail aggressively. Detroit constantly takes momentum, and they take it fast. And if the Eagles respond with hesitation or overly cautious play calling, this game could be over early. That's why the demand this week is simple. Unleash A.J. Brown. 3 targets last week simply isn't acceptable, not only because he's one of the most dominant receivers in the league, but because Detroit's defensive weakness is their secondary. They're banged up at corner, inconsistent on the boundary, and often prone to giving up chunk plays when quarterbacks push the ball vertically. There's no reason Brown shouldn't be featured early and often, and if Bulow wants to dictate tempo instead of react to it, that's where the passing game must begin. With the red zone efficiency already at the top of the league, the key is simply sustaining drives long enough to reach those opportunities. Convert third downs, stretch the field, and let Brown force the Lions' defense to adjust. But before the offense can take control, the Eagles must handle the way Detroit manages the flow of the game. The Lions love sudden swings, quick scoring drives, aggressive fourth down tries, and calculated risks that put immediate pressure on the opponent. The moment momentum shifts, they capitalize on it. That is exactly why time of possession becomes so critical. Philadelphia nearly split it with Green Bay, but against Detroit, that won't be enough. Keeping the Lions' high-octane offense on the sideline isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. Every long drive chips away at their rhythm, cools down their pace, and forces their defense to sustain longer, more draining series. This game isn't going to hinge on one single advantage. It's going to come down to a combination of disciplined offense, disruptive defense, and a coaching staff willing to match Detroit's intensity stride for stride. And as much as this matchup favors explosive plays and big moments, there's an underlying psychological factor that can't be ignored. The Eagles have heard the noise all week, questions about offensive identity, pressure on the coaching staff, and a spotlight that hasn't moved since their inconsistent performances earlier this season. In big games, this team has risen to the moment. In the biggest games, they've embraced it. And now, at home, under the lights, with playoff seeding hanging in the balance, their motivation is as high as it's been all year. Everything builds toward a Sunday night showdown where both teams believe they're the best in the NFC. The Lions want to prove they're not just the new contender, they're the standard. The Eagles want to remind the league that when they play their style of football, nobody in the conference matches them. And with the home crowd behind them, after a week of criticism and reflection, this game carries an energy that feels bigger than the standings. By the time this one ends, someone will walk out with a statement win. Someone will take command of the conference conversation. Someone will prove that their identity is more than just stats on a sheet. Philadelphia believes that team is them, and if their offense matches the intensity their defense has shown the last 2 weeks, they have every reason to believe they can take down one of the league's best. And as this matchup closes in, the final layer worth examining is how Philadelphia responds when the moment demands precision, not chaos. Detroit thrives in chaos, sudden scores, misdirection, tempo spikes, and explosive plays that force defenses to communicate perfectly in real time. That's why this game becomes a test not only of talent, but of discipline. Communication on the back end with young players like Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean must be sharp, especially with Amon-Ra St. Brown being moved like a chess piece across every offensive formation. His versatility forces defenders to identify alignment, coverage, and leverage instantly. One hesitation, one misread, one late reaction, and Detroit will exploit it. But the same applies to the Lions' defense, and that's where Philadelphia can flip the script. Their secondary has been unreliable, and if the Eagles can build rhythm early, Detroit will be forced to adjust in ways they're not comfortable with. That means taking advantage of matchups before the Lions settle into their defensive structure. That means involving A.J. Brown immediately and not waiting until the second half to feature their top weapon. It also means trusting the offensive scheme scheme enough to challenge Detroit's corners vertically instead of living in conservative, field position football. And in the trenches, where this game will be decided more than anywhere else, Philadelphia has finally rediscovered the identity that made them contenders in recent years. When your defensive front starts creating fear again, everything changes. Suddenly the secondary doesn't have to cover as long. Suddenly the offense doesn't feel pressured to score on every possession. Suddenly the opposing quarterback begins anticipating hits instead of anticipating throws. That's the ripple effect Jalen Phillips brought the moment he stepped into the lineup, an energy shift that spread across the entire defense. The Eagles don't need perfection to win this game. They need aggression. They need balance. They need to match Detroit's confidence with their own. And above all, they need to trust the formula that carried them through their biggest wins earlier this season: red zone dominance, timely defensive pressure, and a willingness to lean on their stars instead of hiding them. If they can do that, if they can create the kind of physical, emotional, and strategic environment that forces Detroit to play uncomfortable football, then the path to victory becomes clear. Every year there's a moment when a team either defines itself or lets the moment define them. With playoff implications, national eyes watching, and pressure pushing from every direction, this game has that feel. The kind of game people look back on and say, that's when it shifted. That's when the team decided who they were going to be. If you're riding with the Eagles, if you believe in what this defense has turned into, if you think this offense is due for a breakout, then this Sunday night might be the night everything clicks. And as the layers of this matchup settle into place, there's one final thread that ties everything together. This game is going to demand resilience, not just execution. Detroit is a team that punches quickly, punches often, and doesn't hesitate to take risks that swing the momentum of an entire quarter. They've built their identity around forcing opponents to chase them. But what Philadelphia has shown, especially in their biggest wins this season, is that they're at their best when the game demands composure. The red zone efficiency alone proves that. You don't score touchdowns on more than 80% of your inside the 20 drives without discipline, without clarity, without fully understanding who you are offensively. And although the offensive yardage totals haven't been glamorous, the consistency in finishing drives has kept this team afloat through stretches where the passing game looked disconnected and the run game struggled to gain traction. This is where a matchup like this becomes fascinating. Detroit can score from anywhere on the field: Gibbs with explosive runs, Montgomery with power, St. Brown with precision route running. But Philadelphia can change the entire feel of the contest simply by turning red zone trips into touchdowns and forcing the Lions to respond under pressure rather than dictate the emotional pace. On the defensive side, the recent surge in pass rush production isn't a coincidence, and it isn't a fluke. It's a sign of a unit that finally understands its roles, its spacing, and its timing within Vic Fangio's structure. The numbers tell the story clearly: 18 pressures on Jackson Dart before the bye, 17 pressures on Jordan Love after it, and sacks coming from multiple players across the front. That's not one guy winning. That's a system finally functioning the way it was designed. With Jalen Phillips as the spark, Jay Hunt as the steadying force, Nolan Smith returning to form, and the interior rotation collapsing pockets consistently. Against Jared Goff, that matters more than any other matchup on the field. He's not escaping. He's not rolling out to extend plays. He's not turning broken protection into improvisation. When the pocket collapses, he collapses with it. That's exactly why the Eagles have a real opening here. If they win early downs, if they force third and long situations, if they keep Detroit off schedule, the pass rush becomes the most impactful weapon in the stadium. And as this game unfolds, every snap will feel like a measuring stick. Every adjustment will feel like a message. Every drive will feel like a test of who wants control more: Detroit with their relentless explosiveness or Philadelphia with their emerging defensive presence and need to prove they can punch back after a 10-point outing that raised more questions than answers. This is where identity sharpens. This is where belief turns into performance. This is where the Eagles can show that their growth in the last 2 weeks wasn't a temporary spark, but the beginning of the form they expect to carry into December and beyond. And as the significance of this matchup settles deeper into focus, what becomes even clearer is that Philadelphia doesn't need to reinvent anything to win this game. They just need to lean into the strengths they've already shown, the ones hidden beneath the frustration of an inconsistent season. That elite red zone efficiency isn't just a statistic, it's the identity anchor of an offense that, despite uneven stretches, has proven that once it gets inside the 20, it knows how to finish. In a game where Detroit will force every possession to matter, finishing becomes the difference between staying in the fight and getting run off your own field. On the defensive side, you can feel how the recent surge of pressure has created a completely different energy across the roster. When a unit finally starts playing downhill instead of reactive, confidence becomes contagious. That's what the numbers against Jordan Love showed. That's what the tape against Jackson Dart confirmed. And that's why this matchup against Jared Goff carries a very specific tone. Philadelphia doesn't just have an advantage, they have clarity. They know exactly how to disrupt him, how to force him into the mistakes that have historically followed him when pressure arrives at the top of his drop, and that confidence spreads into the rest of the defense. It simplifies reads for the secondary. It sharpens closing angles. It makes communication easier when the quarterback is forced into quicker throws and predictable timings. That's what pressure does. It shrinks the field, it compresses the offense, and it forces even the most polished units into uncomfortable decisions. Detroit has weapons, no question. They have talent everywhere, but they are not invincible to timing disruption, and they are not immune to a defensive front that has rediscovered its identity. What this ultimately sets up is a game defined by which team manages the emotional flow better. Detroit wants chaos. They want pace, risk, momentum shifts, and the kind of snap-to-snap volatility that creates mismatches and coverage breakdowns. Philadelphia, with a defense rising at the perfect time, wants control. They want structure. They want pressure to dictate the rhythm instead of allowing Detroit to turn the game into a track meet. And with the home crowd fueling every stop, every pressure, every third down moment, this becomes an environment where the Eagles can force Detroit to play a version of football they're not fully comfortable with. All of this sets the stage for a night where composure will matter just as much as explosiveness. A night where every mistake is magnified. A night where every response reveals whether a team is built for the moments that shape the season. And if the Eagles truly believe they're the best team in the NFC when they play their brand of football, then this is the exact type of matchup where that belief must turn into execution, not eventually, not later in the game, but right away, from the first defensive series, from the first offensive possession. And when you zoom out and look at the full picture of what Sunday night represents, it becomes clear that this is more than just another game on the schedule. It's a pressure chamber. It's the kind of environment where teams either rise into who they believe they are or get exposed for who they've pretended to be. Philadelphia has talked all year about wanting home field advantage, about wanting the postseason to run through the link, about believing that when they play their best football, no one in the NFC can match them. Those aren't just statements, they're expectations. And expectations carry weight. That weight is heavier after the 10-point offensive performance in Green Bay, even with the brutal conditions. It's heavier because the Lions are one of the league's most complete teams, capable of scoring in bursts and sustaining pressure on opponents from whistle to whistle. And it's heavier because the Eagles know they cannot fall into the same conservative patterns that have stalled drives in key moments throughout the season. This is not the game to play small. This is not the game to call a scared script. This is the game where every decision sends a message, not only to Detroit, but to the entire NFC. And if the Eagles intend to send that message, the players who define the identity of this team need to be at the center of it. A.J. Brown cannot be an accessory. He has to be a feature, a focal point, a force that Detroit's secondary cannot hide from. Every catch he makes changes the geometry of the field. Every target he draws recalibrates the Lions' defensive structure. That's the kind of gravitational impact he brings, and this is the week to weaponize it. The run game, too, cannot afford to be modest. Detroit will challenge Philadelphia's physicality just as aggressively as the Eagles will challenge theirs. And controlling the line of scrimmage does more than sustain drives. It keeps the Lions' explosive offense off the field, shifts the time of possession balance, and forces Detroit's defense into longer, more exhausting sequences. That kind of cumulative pressure pays off late in the game, when tackling form breaks down, when angles get sloppy, when fatigue creates openings that didn't exist in the first quarter. But even with all of that, this game circles back to the same central truth. The pass rush is the hinge. Every advantage Philadelphia holds depends on its ability to collapse the pocket, compress Goff's timing, and force Detroit into uncomfortable down and distance situations. The tape from the last 2 weeks shows a front that's finally communicating, finally playing with urgency, and finally punishing quarterbacks the way it was built to do. Jalen Phillips' debut wasn't just good, it was tone-setting. Jay Hunt's resurgence wasn't just needed, it was overdue. Nolan Smith's return wasn't just encouraging, it was a sign that the rotation is expanding at the perfect time. When all of that converges, you don't just get pressure, you get identity. And identity is what wins games like this. Philadelphia doesn't need perfection, they need conviction. They need to trust what has worked, correct what hasn't, and embrace the moment the way they have in every major matchup this season. Because when two top NFC contenders collide under the lights, the team that dictates the terms, not the one that reacts to them, is the team that walks out with the statement win. And as the anticipation builds toward kickoff, the deeper reality of this matchup becomes undeniable. The Eagles aren't just preparing for a game, they're preparing for a confrontation with the version of themselves they've been chasing all season. Every dominant moment on defense, every frustrating lull on offense, every spark of potential and every missed opportunity has led to this point, a chance to prove that the flashes weren't accidents but previews of what this team can be when everything aligns. That's why the intensity surrounding this week feels so different. There's a sense of urgency mixed with belief, frustration mixed with pride, and a recognition that the margin for error is smaller than ever. Detroit brings a relentless, aggressive football identity into every game they play, and they don't allow opponents to settle in. They force you to declare who you are from the first possession. If you hesitate, they take control. If you lose focus, they punish the breakdown. If you're passive, they bury you. Philadelphia's challenge isn't simply matching that energy, it's channeling it into something sharper, more controlled, and more punishing. The defense has already started turning into that kind of unit. The last 2 weeks weren't just improvement, they were transformation. The numbers show pressure, sacks, disruption, but the tape shows something even more important: unity. 11 players acting with the same urgency, with timing that finally syncs, with confidence that's been slowly building even through the chaos of earlier games. And it all starts up front. When the defensive front sets the tone, the entire structure of Fangio's system works the way it was meant to. That's why Phillips' arrival felt less like an addition and more like ignition. It allowed Jay Hunt to play faster. It allowed the interior to attack with less hesitation. It allowed Nolan Smith to come back into a rotation that doesn't ask him to be a savior, only a contributor. Against an immobile quarterback like Jared Goff, that synergy becomes the most important weapon